everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I'm here today with Norman Ohler, author of Blitzed, Drugs in Nazi Germany from 2015, and the more recent Tripped in 2024 that talks about the similar time period, honestly, World War II kind of German-Swiss side of the psychedelic, early unfolding of the psychedelic thing in Germany. So, Norman, thanks for being here today.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Big fan of Blitzed. So get this, I actually just read your book out of the blue because I tripped recently. Had no idea it was you who also had written Blitzed. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I connected it. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then someone tells me we're recording for our podcast, and I was very excited. So excited to dig in here and share some of the story with our audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you give us a little bit of your background? Are you a trained historian, journalist?
I'm a trained journalist. I graduated from the Hamburg School of Journalism, which claims of itself to be the best journalism school in Europe, which I don't know if that's true, but it's pretty good. It's kind of hard to get into, and after I did my social service for my country instead of the military, we had a draft at one point in Germany after I graduated, there was still a draft. So I had to serve. So I served as a social service worker, and then I went to this journalism school. So I was quite young, and it was a very good training, but I really hated it because I was kind of rebellious. I wanted to create art, not follow any journalistic path or be in that world, which I thought was a corporate world, which it was. I thought it's better to be like a crazy artist living in downtown Manhattan, which is where I then moved to from Germany in the early 90s, which was a place actually filled with crazy artists or desperate artists or interesting people, I thought at the time. So I really had a great time there. And that was kind of my university. Like, it was really university of the streets in those years in Manhattan and in the Lower East Side. And that kind of that combined with the journalistic schooling I'd had before kind of formed me as a writer, which is basically a fiction writer. Well, actually, you can't really say that. I mean, my first 3 books were novels, and I thought I was a fiction writer, and I am a fiction writer. But then when I started researching Nazis and drugs, I thought it's better to do nonfiction in this case. So then I drew on my, journalistic teaching. So I know kind of how good journalistic text is supposed to be, or I know a little bit about research, even though we never went to archives. Journalists usually don't go to archives. That's what I do. That's because I thought historians do that. I don't have any training as a historian. I never studied history. I studied after journalism school and after the University of the Streets of Manhattan. I went back to Berlin and studied for 2 years the techno scene. And then while I was doing the techno scene, I was attending some courses at the Humboldt University in Berlin in philosophy and cultural sciences. So I'm a bit trained, in the academic world, but I'm not a historian. Or at least I wasn't trained as a historian. Now I guess I am a historian because I write historical books. But when Blitzed came out in Germany, the biggest German weekly, Der Spiegel, kind of a conservative media outlet, pretending to be leftist or liberal, labeled me a non-historian and kind of criticized my approach because my approach is a little bit different than how historians usually approach something. I'm like a gonzo historian. I'm like the German Hunter S. Thompson when it comes to nonfiction books, I guess. Which is a big label. Actually, I hate labels, but I kind of like that one because it makes the Hunter S. Thompson even, the German puts even like a weird angle to that thing. It's a bit scary but interesting. I mean, I like this approach. So it is fictional in a way because I try to write in a readable form, Um, that's why I didn't want to write nonfiction books, because I thought they were boring. You have to write them in a boring way so they're credible, but that's actually not true. Yeah, so that was just a preconception I had because I'd never actually read nonfiction books. I was really into novels at the time, and when I wrote the first nonfiction books, I kind of had to reinvent it and invent it for myself. So that gonzo kind of historian style, um, which I think makes Blitzed and Trip fun to read, was developed. So my life basically kind of brought me brought me to this style of writing.
I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, to your point about history being boring, I think inside academia, they do that on purpose. They don't necessarily want to be accessible, and they want to impress each other. And that's how
Yeah,
they work
maybe.
towards getting tenure and more money,
Yeah, I
as
guess
opposed
so.
to writing for bigger audiences, which actually I think is far more relevant and helpful, right? Like this weird psychedelic revival that's happening now. If we don't understand the origins, what are we doing? We really have to look at the history carefully, I think.
Yeah, that's why I started writing Trip, because I wanted to know about the early history of LSD, and then actually the whole history. I mean, I didn't really focus on like the 60s. I focused on the early period because I thought that was under-examined, and also more relevant than what happened, or at least relevant, because the question that I try to answer was actually a question of my father when he asked me, because I told him about LSD being good against Alzheimer, and my mother has Alzheimer, so we discussed this in the family, and he said, and he is a former judge, so he's a man of the law, as he calls himself. He said, why is it not available in the pharmacy if it's so promising against dementia? So that kind of that question, I had to answer, and I wanted no, I wanted to answer for my mother basically, and I thought that the answer lies in the 40s, like after the discovery of LSD in 43 until like 1950. What happened? Why didn't LSD become a regular medicine? Why did it get such a bad reputation? What happened with poor LSD? It's just a innocent molecule, and suddenly it's like everyone's afraid of it. It's not so scary actually.
So let's rewind the tape. How did this kind of military industrial and let's call it drug complex first come across your radar, where things like methamphetamines or LSD were of interest to governments, in particular Nazi Germany? Like when did you become aware of that, and you wanted to take it seriously for a book like Blitzed?
I became aware of it in 2010 in my writing tower in Berlin at the river, when my DJ friend Alex visited me and told me that I should write a book about Nazis and drugs. An idea which I liked but kind of rejected, because I said Nazis didn't use any drugs. I mean, he was talking about a novel, so I mean, you can invent anything in a novel. So I thought, yeah, maybe it is good for a novel just to invent something. I don't know. I mean, Nazis and drugs sounds kind of interesting. But so I did a little bit of online research and actually found like some indications that there had been drug abuse in Nazi Germany, which I thought was interesting. And then I came upon a paper. Well, at first I asked Alex, like, why do you suggest that? And he said that a friend of his who's an antique dealer, had discovered heavy teen packages in an old medicine cabinet from the 40s in an old East Berlin apartment. And that antique dealer actually took the pills together with his boyfriend, and they took it for about a month. Like every day they were on this old German methamphetamine, and they apparently liked it. They were into drugs. It was an antique dealer into drugs, and my friend, the DJ, is also into drugs, so he also took this methamphetamine tablet and also liked it. So that's when I actually started research, because I thought, this is crazy. Like, tablets from the 40s, they're still active. They still give you a high. because Alex said it gave him quite a strong high after the third tablet. Like as I said, the first one was okay, and then he took another one after a few hours, and the third one, he said, then it really was a strong drug experience. So I thought that sounds like a crazy story. I mean, it is a crazy story. So I found like some information on the company that made methamphetamine, and I found one paper, kind of shortish academic paper by a German historian claiming, and he was like he's not a mainstream historian, but a medicine historian, so kind of a nerdy historian. And he claimed that without methamphetamine, there would have been no Blitzkrieg, which is the German term for speed war. And that was kind of strange to read from an academic. So I decided to contact him and spoke with him. And then he pointed me into the right sections and areas of the military archive of Germany, where I actually found a ton of stuff relating to the methamphetamine consumption of the German army, which then led actually to surprising victories. First, a surprising strategy, and that surprising strategy, which was the speedy advance, that led to the surprising victory, especially in the West against France and Great Britain. So that was kind of the beginning of when I thought that drugs are somehow relevant to our history.
Mm. I like that. And when did psychedelics particularly come on your radar, in terms of an interesting topic that might also have some sort of relationship to Nazi Germany?
Well, I was then, trying to research everything that the Nazis did with drugs for the book Blitzed. And it's a big methamphetamine story, and it's also a big biography on Hitler in a way, folded into the book. Hitler's seen with the lens, basically through the lens of his doctor, a personal physician who gave him all kinds of stuff, especially opioids. And it's a very, very interesting story. So I was really into these two strands for the book. They're like the pillars that the book rests on. But I was doing all kinds of research in relation to all kinds of drugs. And at one point, I was in the archive of the former concentration camp of Dachau, close to Munich. And the archivist said, yeah, here we had psychedelic research done by the SS. And that was the first time, I think, that I heard about psychedelic research, because psychedelics and the Nazis, it sounds a bit weird. I mean, they were really into meth because you just follow auras and you do your thing, and like you're fearless, and you become like a bit robot-like. That's the effect of methamphetamine. So it's kind of perfect for an army. While psychedelics are very, fascism and psychedelics, you don't really put them together, but they actually were interested in it because they thought maybe it's a weapon. They were interested in finding a truth drug, because they were paranoid, and sometimes even torture couldn't reveal all the secrets during an interrogation. So they thought maybe a drug could help. So they did these tests in Dachau. The SS gave coffee spiked with mescaline to inmates. And then there was a mentioning of another substance, which was not, the name was not given, but it was described as tasteless and odorless. And that was in 1944. So I kind of became curious, like what really happened. And I asked the archivist about the papers, because I had just found 2 pages. And these 2 pages were kind of vague still. And he said, well, the rest of the papers is in the United States, because when the American military liberated Dachau, they took also paperwork from the SS to, investigate it. So I kind of knew I had to go to the United States to find them in order to write about it. And that turned into the book Trip.
Mm. Yeah. interestingly enough, I've visited Dachau. My grandfather was part of the team that liberated Dachau, so that's an interesting kind of psychedelic bridge.
Well,
And
did he
yeah,
make did he make movies or something?
no, I wish,
Yeah.
but
I
no,
mean, these movies are pretty terrible to watch.
yeah, it's yeah, I did the whole museum and tour. It was quite disturbing. So
In Dachau.
yeah, um, yeah, ages ago, maybe 2001. But yeah, the psychedelic bridge is fascinating. Do you? So this is more speculative, and I don't know that we're going to have an answer here. But a
Well, I
lot.
mean,
I have
no,
a.
sorry,
This is
you want to
my
say something
question is the
speculative.
speculative thing. So around like Operation Paperclip, when the United States kind of took a lot of Nazi scientists over to our programs, like, and just the strange name MKUltra. Like, is there a chance that it was the same program in a sense, just kind of for CIA purposes? Did you see anything leaning in that direction?
Yeah, that's basically what Trip is all about. I mean, that to describe that link, trying to find the link between Nazi research and CIA research. And I could find the link. It was kind of difficult because um, I wanted especially to understand whether LSD was part of these Dachau experiments and whether that had any effects on the later history of LSD and whether that would lead to any clues regarding the answer to my father why he couldn't buy LSD in the pharmacy. So what I found was that, um, well, I went to the Novartis archive. Novartis is this pharmaceutical giant that swallowed the pharmaceutical giant Sandoz, which was the producer of LSD. And so I went to the archive of Novartis, which is in Basel, Switzerland, and I wanted to see, if there's any connection, like I wanted to see what happened within the company after 43, when Albert Hoffmann, the famous chemist, discovered LSD. So I was looking at the papers of the CEO of Sandoz, Arthur Stoll, and I could see that he was in intense correspondence with a German biochemist called Richard Kuhn. Um, they were kind of research buddies since the 20s because they had had the same teacher. That teacher's name is Richard Willstetter, a Jewish German biochemist who received the Nobel Prize for chemistry. And Willstetter's specialty was to examine plants for their potent for alkaloids. Basically, he was an organic chemist, biochemist. So Richard Kuhn and Stoll, his two prodigies. Is that a word, prodigy or prodigy sons? How do you say it? His two master students.
Right.
And they were also, into examining plants. And what Arthur Stoll did with his Sandoz company was to focus it in the beginning almost completely on ergot, which is a fungus that grows on rye. So not a plant, but a mushroom, basically. And out of this ergot, the company made quite a few medicines, like a migraine medicine and a medicine that would stop bleeding after when childbirth was finished. So the company became very rich on ergot, and then one of the ergot products was LSD, and the ergot research had been openly discussed between the Swiss CEO Stoll and the German biochemist Kuhn. Kuhn was also into ergot. So the only the interesting thing is that at the time Kuhn was actually working on on the truth serum. Like he was Hitler's leading biochemist. He also received the Nobel Prize for chemistry actually, and declined to accept it because Hitler didn't want German scientists to accept it. So he wrote a letter, which I also quote in Trip.
That was a great portion of the story. I love that scene.
He like writes to the Swedish Academy saying that they giving him the Nobel Prize can only be seen as a way of the West trying to get a good German scientist away from his leader, basically. So it was kind of ideological letter that he wrote. But he was a good scientist, you know, he was a very capable scientist at the same time. But also kind of an evil scientist because he developed sarin, the deadliest nerve poison, for the German war machine. It was never used, but you know, he developed it, Richard Kuhn. So he was kind of a weird guy to communicate with at the time, but for the Swiss CEO, it was no, you know, he was his old friend, like, you know, and the Swiss were not against the Nazis. They were neutral, so they would also be neutral towards Nazis, you know, they were not against the Nazis. So Kuhn, I found this in the archives, like the letter exchange between Kuhn and Stoll, and then Stoll like sent him ergotamine, which is the precursor to LSD. I found a letter where Kuhn thanks the company for sending him that stuff in October 1943 while he was searching for the truth drug, trying to develop the truth drug. So he developed from the ergotamine either LSD, pure LSD, or some derivative of LSD in order to be used. It looks like in the concentration camp of Dachau, alongside with mescaline, and the advantage of the ergot drug, LSD, is that it's odorless and tasteless, like it was written in the report, unlike mescaline, which is bitter. So if you give someone, it's harder to hide giving someone mescaline than giving someone LSD. Also, you need more, like you need a lot
like
more.
Half gram or a gram. It's crazy big.
Yeah, it's very hard to give someone such an amount without that person knowing it. So for an intelligence service, it's better to have LSD. Much better, actually. It's the dream drug for intelligence. Because it's just a drop, you know, you don't taste it and suddenly you have.
Was there
the
evidence
experience.
that it worked? Did you? Yeah.
Well, I wrote a report that an inmate, you know, he related what he experienced in the concentration camp of Dachau, like famished, you know, poor inmate, a French guy, and he had a like a marvelous spiritual experience. Like he had a great trip in the concentration camp. So it was like the opposite of what the SS expected, you know. So I mean, that already, like that first experiment kind of showed that you can't really abuse LSD as a truth drug because you cannot control really LSD. Like you cannot apply. Like I can give you I can give you alcohol, and I kind of know what will happen to you if I give you like a lot of alcohol. But with LSD, you never really know. So it doesn't really work as a truth drug. But the SS didn't find out that it doesn't work because while they were still doing their tests, the camp was liberated by your grandfather, and then your grandfather basically found these reports in the there. You know, they had like a research station in the camp of Dachau where they did a lot of different, you know, experiments on inmates, and so the drug experiments were just like a part of that quote unquote scientific SS research, which was basically inhumane torture. You know, you could also call it torture. People died, you know, from these tests. We all know the horror stories. So the LSD or psychedelic research was just a part of that. But the Americans obviously took, you know, the documents and investigated them, read them. They sent them actually to their drug advisor. His name is Beecher. He was a Harvard professor. He had been in the war for the American military in Europe on the ground. But at the time then, when they sent him the DSS reports, he was back in Harvard, and he studied them and he evaluated them. And he actually continued to do some of the LSD tests that the SS had done at Harvard University in the late 40s, early 50s with American students, gave them unwittingly LSD and stuff like that, because no one knew at the time what is LSD. You know, you have a student, you know, doing a test series, you say this is like some, you know, maybe you're like, it was very, it's totally unethical basically what Beecher did. It's kind of funny that Harvard still considers him like a good professor, and there's even a Beecher Prize by the University of Harvard where you rewarded for ethical research or something like that. So it's kind of ironic. So Beecher wrote reports on what he called ego-depressant drugs, because that's in a way what psychedelics are. They depress the ego, and other areas of the brain start thinking or start connecting or start networking. And then in 47, the CIA is founded because America, being now in the midst of a new war, the Cold War against the Soviet Union, which was like a life-threatening, like a really serious confrontation, which lasted for decades, was founded. The CIA was founded as a powerful tool to be, able to not, go down in this Cold War. So the CIA kind of takes over the psychedelic research that the military took over from the Nazis. So the baton goes to the CIA, and they really go into it. Like, they really love it. Like, they have a program called MKUltra, which was basically a mind control program, and a big part of that MKUltra was the drug induced mind control research that was done from the start of the CIA, from 47 onwards, all the way into the 70s.
So that timeline
probably
aligns
still,
perfect with Paperclip and kind of the importation.
Well, the connection to Paperclip is that when your grandfather liberated us, for which I thank him, because it was really necessary to be liberated from National Socialism. The American military had special units called ALSOS, ALSOS, which were, they were half soldiers, half scientists, basically, small units. And their job was to find German scientists and, basically exploit their knowledge for the American war effort. So one of the guys they interviewed was Richard Kuhn in Heidelberg, and Kuhn basically spilled the beans like immediately. He told them about LSD. He didn't hold anything back, because at the time, as a German former Nazi scientist, you had basically three choices. One, you get caught by the Russians, and they do something with you, like send you to Siberia, or it's not pleasant. You don't want to do that, except you're a communist. But if you were a Nazi scientist before, probably you weren't a communist. You were probably an anti-communist, because Nazis are right-wing and communists are left-wing. So most scientists kind of were happy when they were caught by the Americans, because the Americans gave them the choice to either collaborate and maybe be with Operation Paperclip, which brought them to the United States, where they could continue their careers, or they could stay in West Germany and also continue their careers. Or if they didn't collaborate, they would be sent to the Nuremberg trial on the bench and maybe be hanged, or have, prison sentences for being like Nazi scientists. So the choice was, easy. Why would you sacrifice your life for like Nazi idea, which was, over anyhow? So it was better to side with the Americans. It was the best choice. Richard Kuhn made that choice. That's how the American military also learned about LSD, not only from finding these reports in Dachau, but also from debriefing Richard Kuhn. So that is the connection with Paperclip. So basically, the CIA knows quite a lot. Well, it knows everything that the Nazis knew about the truth drug, and then they try to figure out, does it really work, and how does it work, and what does it actually mean, that term? I mean, it's basically an examination of the human mind and the consciousness. So the CIA really did a huge test series using American universities in a very sneaky way, I would say, because the CIA gave money to foundations, which are, I guess you call them neutral, like the Rockefeller Foundation or the whatever foundation. They got like $200,000 for MKUltra research, which then they gave to universities, which were not told. They were doing research whatever they wanted, which in that case happened then to be LSD research on, for example, if you give unwitting test subjects LSD, can you disturb their perception? Of course you can, but so, you go, if you make that finer and finer and try to develop, like, how could you actually abuse LSD as a weapon? And the people at the university often didn't even know that their knowledge was playing into the hands of the MKUltra program. So that is kind of an interesting side story that I examined in Tripped, or maybe a main story, I guess.
I was surprised when one or two of my guests let me know that they were working on MKUltra projects as part of university or hospital research. They just had no idea. They were kept very much. They told me later. Yeah, I found it fascinating that they figured it out and pieced it together.
Yeah, I guess you would now if you did that back then, and now you get the whole context. You would like see your past differently.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, what were some of the major lessons that you think the current psychedelic scene might need to be aware of from Tripped, particularly?
Well, I think the psychedelic renaissance, as it is called, is very mysterious, and I wouldn't call myself an expert on it. I think many dangers are somehow looming, um, and I don't know. I mean, from Tripped, you can basically learn a lot about um, that 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 very troubled first phase of LSD. Um, I mean, we can all learn that those policies should not be in the hands of the government, obviously. That the psychedelics need to be legalized, immediately, or the next American president, for example, must make this like a priority. Because if you legalize psychedelics, you should really do it with your heart, with your mind, and with your heart. It must be done, the society must understand that these substances are of a huge benefit to that society in terms of mental health or health in general. And the only entities that do not really gain from it might be pharmaceutical companies. But then again, other pharmaceutical companies which will offer psychedelic compounds will benefit. So it will be a big shift in the pharmaceutical landscape, which of course is a very rigid, brutal, and very profitable, ruthless, horrible, murderous landscape. So it's not going to be an easy transition, but I think a society that really cares for itself will do that step, has to do that step. I would be interested to see also how the current candidates relate to this topic. I don't know, maybe you know something about that?
Oh, I don't believe either has any kind of explicit position. It's too politically risky in America to talk about psychedelics still. I imagine both will actually support psychedelics in a somewhat of a way, but I don't know what that's going to be. It's scary either way. Drug policy in America is quite terrifying.
I mean, there's something to be said that the drug is illegal because that also creates like a certain aura around the drug. But I think the benefits of legalization would be much bigger than the aura change that psychedelics would go through. Um, and I think the health benefits are just so overwhelming that it's like a democracy kind of shoots itself in the knee if it prohibits psychedelics, because it blocks itself from so much potential and wastes so much human resources. And also, I think it would bring a cultural evolution with it, maybe even a cultural revolution. A psychedelic society would be revolutionary different
Yeah.
than a non-psychedelic society. So much potential would be released. Um, yeah, I mean, you know that also. So
Right.
preaching
That's
to
why I
the
spend all this
preaching
time
to the
here.
believer.
Yeah.
Huh?
So I'm curious about you you had a really big media appearance somewhat recently on probably the world's most popular podcast. Could you talk about how Joe Rogan received your stories and how
Yeah,
that
of
experience
course.
was for you?
Um, I mean, I had a lot of different media contacts with Tripped, and just before I get into Joe Rogan, I was like months before actually, I was invited to be on Fox News with Jesse Waters, and I was a bit reluctant to go because we in Germany we like think we shouldn't like if it's right wing, maybe we shouldn't communicate with that. But my publisher thought it was good, you know. And Jesse Waters actually is in the same publishing house as me, like HarperCollins. So I asked why does he want to interview me, and his assistant said because he loves the book and he loves the topic of LSD and legalizing LSD, and that was surprising to me. And then the talk with him was really good, and it was on Fox News prime time, like a lot of people saw it. So I kind of I kind of had a good experience, and Joe Rogan obviously is a totally different media outlet, like the opposite, I guess you could say. Um, but still, for me as a German, it's an American media outlet that I don't know that well. But I've heard a lot about it. I hadn't even watched a lot of episodes, but then when I was invited, I did watch some, and I kind of liked it actually. I liked the idea to have a stage for 3 hours in front of several million people. Also, a stage that stays because that stuff stays in the internet. So I think what Joe Rogan created is an amazing piece of art or media art. I think it's a really interesting contribution to our media landscape. And I think he kind of lifted the whole idea of podcast onto another level and kind of made it to what it is now, or at least is a player in that, you know, development and a factor. So I was very, very, very curious when I was sitting in the plane landing in Austin, Texas, being picked up by his team, and I mean everyone was really cool. It was a very smooth experience. It was fun to go to the studio. It was fun meeting Joe. I liked him from the start. I think the conversation was fine. I didn't think it was so great. I mean, I thought it was very good. I mean, I was happy, you know, with it. But then people really liked it, which kind of surprised me. But maybe I hadn't seen enough of it before, or maybe they liked the German guy, or you know, they liked the topic. I mean, it's great to talk about LSD, and especially to someone like Joe Rogan, who's also interested in it and open to all. You know, you can say anything on that podcast. Like I can say with you, also I can say anything. You know, it's also a very free podcast. So thank you for having me. Some podcasts or some interviews are not like that. You know, I wouldn't. You know, but then they don't go for 3 hours and have like millions of viewers. So the whole Joe Rogan thing for me is great. You know, I had a lot of fun, and yeah, it was good. It was a good experience
Yeah, good.
overall.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
intersection of World War II history and psychedelics is like a sweet spot for him. So I
I guess
think
so.
you
Yeah, I was
kind of
like a
nailed
good.
it.
Yeah, I was like a perfect guest. Yeah.
And yeah, he's complicated, right? Like he is a big reason that psychedelics have progressed so much as a
Mm,
popularizer, especially in
I guess
American pop
so.
culture.
Yeah.
And you know, before he became, in a lot of ways, he's become very right wing and a bit misogynistic and a little problematic here and there. But you know, in 10 years ago, it was a totally different game. Even 5 years ago, it was a totally different thing. And he was very bipartisan. He was, you know, admittedly going to vote for leftists, all this kind of stuff. And now it's shifted. It's shifted in some strange ways that I'm not super excited about, but it's still exposing people to ideas that they otherwise would not get exposed to. You know, and Fox News, for instance, is going to give you a really shallow view of any topic, and Joe Rogan's
Absolutely.
giving a
Yeah.
3-hour deep dive. Even if it's
Yeah.
perverted, it's still 3 hours.
I mean, he gives everyone a stage, I would imagine. I think he refused to talk with Trump so far, which I think is kind of
It's probably
interesting that he
smart.
would. Huh?
It's smart in my opinion. But yeah,
Maybe he doesn't feel like talking to Trump for 3 hours. I don't know.
me either.
But
Me
I guess
either.
it would be interesting. I mean, I
It
looked
would
a
be an
little bit.
interesting
Yeah,
conversation. I would
it would
listen
be.
to it.
But it would certainly be a promotion for Trump, I think.
Right.
Because
I
Joe
don't think Trump
Rogan,
would even like agree to be on it because it would be not curated enough
no, but he
for
was on
him.
Friedman just a few days ago. And that's the same
That's
thing. That's the
interesting.
thing.
Somewhat
Yeah,
similar. Yeah.
yeah.
I suppose I should listen to that. I somewhat respect Lex. I just think he's a little naive sometimes. But
Yeah,
he
I
is
mean,
really smart.
with Trump, you could be more aggressive, I think. But I don't know if that podcast form, you're not grilling someone somehow. That's not the intent, I think. So you give a politician quite a stage. Like you could do a 3 hour podcast with Hitler on Joe Rogan, and it would probably be fascinating, because he would talk about, his ideas and, so, I mean, but obviously, so that's the danger of like inviting everyone in a way, but
Hmm.
also, it's an interesting concept to do that. And I think it is healing in a way because like America is so divided, like that kind of media only endorses that kind of policies and that kind of media only the other. And Joe Rogan or podcasts usually don't do that. They're open platforms. And I think it's important to have open platforms. So I think leftist people have to stomach that also right wingers, get the platform. Like Elon Musk is a total right winger, and he was on Joe Rogan twice. He kind of masks his conservative his right wing attitudes under this like free speech thing or no censorship thing. So I would if I think if you talk with someone like Elon Musk, you have to be much more aggressive because he also endorses policies by the Israeli Prime Minister, which are highly problematic, like kind of posing with him for photographs, and I mean this is very serious. So it's also that like that form of podcast could also be problematic when it comes to questions. Was there like I mean this is mass murder going on, so can you really talk to the mass murderer? Like accept him as a I don't know. It's if I was a podcast host, I would think about these things and create like my own framework, which would obviously be different than Joe Rogan's because I'm German. I would probably do it in Berlin, and I would have different political aesthetics. But I think what's that this kind of comedy podcast thing that's happening in the US or your podcast, I think that's actually very valuable to the media landscape of the West.
Absolutely. Diversity away from kind of centralized control and ownership. And like the cost to produce these things is so low relative to traditional media. And
Yeah, it's pretty smart. It's a pretty smart format.
yeah. And
And
I
it's
think
good.
it's part of
It's
this
like the
media
old, it's like a
war.
good old talk show. It's
Hmm.
like a talk show, but it's more minimalist even, and people don't need to see like the same tricks all of like the TV tricks. You don't need them anymore. It just I always thought podcasts are boring because you just have two people talking, but it can be interesting. So then it's interesting. You don't get distracted by bullshit.
All right. So let's talk about LSD more then.
Sure.
All right. So I I have been studying LSD from a clinical perspective since about 2001 when Dr. Stanislav Grof came on my radar. Notably, he lived under both Nazi and Soviet occupation in Prague and worked in a Soviet hospital where he was treating the elite, which I didn't really learn that there was a Soviet elite until I started reading Grof, and it was really perplexing to me. But yeah, he was treating the elite in a hospital with LSD and doing a lot of really impressive work. And the data was really compelling. And this was outside the scope of, in my opinion, things like an MKUltra brainwashing program. This is actually intent to heal people of traumas and addictions and many other things. And, I think the literature on LSD speaks for itself. We don't actually really need to do all that much more research before we medicalize this thing, in my opinion. And, that was kind of a little bit of your experience, right, with your mother. Could you speak a little bit about introducing this to your family, the LSD topic?
Yeah, I'd read a white paper claiming that microdosed LSD could help against Alzheimer because it stimulates the 5-HT receptors, which Alzheimer degenerates. And then my father asked the famous question, why can't I buy it in the pharmacy? So when I came back with my story, kind of showing that the LSD prohibition happened not because LSD is dangerous, but for other, highly complex political reasons, actually, which is, the story of Trip, my research that I talked about a little bit today. We discussed this, on her, amongst each other, and then also with my mother, and got her consent to try it. And then I had organized it from Switzerland, actually, and my father, gave the famous drop into the coffee, and my mother reacted very positively, kind of from the first time on she took it. Alzheimer has the tendency to kind of enclose people, like they don't communicate as well anymore, and if the disease continues, it gets worse and worse, obviously, until there's no more communication. So that LSD microdose, which my father also took, and he felt nothing, which is what you're supposed to not feel in a microdose. So, but she did, because her brain, I guess, was attacked by it. So her brain really did react to it, like like a dried flower that you put some water to and it's still alive, so it gets a little greener. And so it was quite beautiful to see her cheeks flush and her vocal ability increase and her eyes shine. So that was the first experience, and then we did it, not excessively, not always. I mean, microdosing also you shouldn't do every day. You should do it every second day, every third day, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, then stop for a week. Like, it can be irregular, I think. So that's kind of how my father approached it, because also sometimes he forgot about it, and then he remembered again, oh, we still have the drop in the fridge, and he gave another drop.
I've seen some problems when people do it daily occur.
Yeah, I mean, tolerance builds up, and it's not. I asked a neuroscientist, and he said actually don't do it daily. That's a chronic use. You should never really use a medicine, every day. It's not good. So LSD is the same. And she's good. She likes it. She's good on it.
And the way you told the story in the book was really, really beautiful. And I love the idea of you challenging your father a little bit around being, person of the law, right? Why is this possible? And trusting the establishment and things like that.
Yeah, for him it was also surprising what he did or what he experienced. And then I actually wanted to call the book LSD for Mom because of that, that kind of emotional arc that the book has. But still it's called Trip now. But for me, that book's called LSD for Mom. And now I lost my arc. What did you ask me?
Oh, gosh. It's about this interesting dynamic with your father being a former judge
All
in
right.
Germany.
Okay. Yeah. Something happened.
Yeah.
And a few weeks ago, he was outside the house and he got a call from the neighbor that he has to return immediately because there were 4 policemen waiting at his door. And he thought it's related to a minor traffic accident that happened the day before when someone touched his car that was parked on the curb. So he didn't. He said, "No, I'm not going to come home for that." And the neighbor said, "You really should come. They're really insisting that you come home immediately." And they didn't arrest him, but they had a warrant based on an interview he did on German TV where he talks about how he gave LSD to his wife. So there's four young policemen, and he's like a very high. He had been a very high judge. He's quite known in this little town. The four policemen were kind of shy, and they said, "Well, we're so sorry, Dr. Ohler, but we have this warrant here, and we must enter your apartment. And where did you always keep, or do you still keep the LSD?" And he said, "No, there's no LSD in the house." At the time, when they came, there actually was no LSD. So he didn't lie to them. He said, "There's no LSD here." "Where did you keep it?" "I always kept it in the fridge." So they "Can we open the fridge?" He said, "Sure, open the fridge." They opened the fridge. They saw nothing. So, and then he was kind of hoping for a trial to start because he knows the court system and that world very well. So he wanted to experience it from the other side. And for him, it was very interesting. But then the state prosecutor actually dropped the case. We were kind of realizing that it's ridiculous.
Yeah. One of my friends had a pretty major bust with mushrooms here in Colorado. And
Really? I thought it's legal there.
this was before, maybe 3 or 4 years before a lot of the good progress was happening. What was interesting was the judge and the prosecuting attorney went into the back room as they were trying to figure out sentencing because they were a little confused. Mushrooms being different from a thing like cocaine or other drugs that the law enforcement also would prefer us not to have access to, and they they were perplexed because they went and did some research and said, "Oh, this actually looks a lot more like medicine than a drug of harm or abuse or something, right?" And they came back and instead of 10 years gave them 2 weeks or something like that, which is fascinating to me. That just an independent judge with no tie to the psychedelic movement whatsoever kind of came up with that determination, and I hope that continues.
I really think that the majority of the American population is ready for psychedelics. I really do think so. So actually, if you do go on Friedman to check out his talk with Trump, Friedman asked him, "Wouldn't it be better if everyone in Congress ate magic mushrooms?" So, and he kind of brings it up, and he kind of says, "Well, yeah, because Trump before says he's open about marijuana, like he thinks it's a good idea. Medical marijuana is great. Like he says it as an opportunist, basically. But he also knows that the population kind of wants this, and he also spoke very openly about psychedelics. He said, "Yeah, we'll have to, do it in a proper way." But I totally agree with you. So this, like, I mean, I don't know what his church, like his Christian fundamentalist supporters, say about that. They're probably not so happy, but maybe I think there's slowly a shift within the American society accepting psychedelics, just like now marijuana is accepted. Like no one thinks anymore that marijuana is the devil's weed. I mean, maybe a few religious fanatics
Good
still
portion
think
of the
that.
country still does, but it's shifting, right? They don't really have
Yeah,
ground to
it's not the
stand on.
majority anymore. It's not the
Yeah.
mainstream opinion anymore, and that is also happening to psychedelics right now. So we will probably see a legalization of psychedelics and marijuana in the United States. I think it's in the next 10 years that will happen. Maybe even in the next administration. Who
It
knows?
could be. I'm working very hard on all drug decriminalization. I don't know if you
Yeah,
saw
many
this.
people.
The
Yeah.
American Medical Association put out a position recently that they support all drug decriminalization, which is fascinating because they're a very conservative institution, and they're the reason we don't have single payer healthcare, for instance. But I think there's some interesting stuff there.
I mean, the only body that doesn't seem to understand it is the FDA by like not allowing MDMA onto the market. That was really old school. And I think the head of the FDA has to, give up his post because that's just an unacceptable situation and decision. I mean, if there were problems with the application, then that has to be fixed, and everyone has to want to get this approved. So the FDA has to completely change its position on that. It was a really shameful decision, I think.
I agree. Yeah. I constantly am still in arguments with people who are supporting the FDA on this, even though they're pro team psychedelic. It's fascinating. I'm happy to connect you with some people on that topic if you'd like.
Like from the psychedelic community.
Yeah. Well, that's how I see them. They might not see themselves that way.
I mean,
But yeah,
I mean, there are like that's why I said I don't really know the psychedelic scene so well because there are like people who say that an organization like MAPS is actually evil because they're actually tied with the pharmacy. Like I don't really know like what is rumor, what is true. Like, but I think MDMA. I think MDMA actually is a weird compound to legalize because I think it's quite heavy on the body. For me, it's a hard drug unlike LSD and psilocybin, which are much easier to take. And I mean, I take LSD and psilocybin quite a lot. I take MDMA like hardly ever because, I get a depression the next day from it, basically. It's
we
still
try
a
to
great
say
drug,
maximum
but
4 times a year is what we try to suggest, maximum. But it's hard. It's hard to do if you're in that circuit.
yeah. So I think, I mean, but I still think it should be legalized. Obviously, it's a great substance, and if we know how to use it, we should use it, and we do know how to use it, so why not use it? But I think LSD and psilocybin are really like and probably psilocybin will be the first because LSD still has that stigma. But that's why I wrote the book LSD for Mom, AK Trip, to kind of remove that stigma, at least from the people who read the book. And more people now are actually reading the book because I was on Joe Rogan, now I'm on your podcast, now I was on even bloody Fox News. So yeah, I'm happy to contribute to the psychedelic revolution in the world.
Have
I
you
want.
communicated much with Dr. David Nutt, who did that drug harm scale in the Lancet ages ago?
Well, when my book came out in England, in London, the book launch was Professor Nutt was like he was like the host of the evening, so he kind of introduced the book, and we had a talk. It was actually quite funny. Like he's a really funny guy. I only met him this once so far, but we had like a great time together at this book launch. And he gave me his book, so I'm looking at a little bit at his work. So I know him. I know him. Yeah,
That's great.
another
His
character in the scene.
position when that famous paper came out was that if we're basing drug policy on science, we need to immediately decriminalize anything that's safer than alcohol and tobacco. And then work on figuring out what the right moves are for the rest of them. And I think that's one of the more intelligent positions, more careful and intelligent positions on drug policy I've heard to date. And LSD and
Yeah,
psilocybin were in the top 3 safest.
makes sense.
Yeah, MDMA too. He got in big trouble for saying MDMA was safer than horse riding, which apparently is complicated to say in England. Yeah.
Yeah, he likes to get in trouble.
I appreciate that about him. So, do you have an interest in another topic that you might be writing in this milieu in the future?
Yeah, I do want to write one more book about like more of an open book about history and drugs, but I don't know exactly. I can't really talk about it right now.
Yeah,
Like,
I
I'm not
understand.
inspired to talk about it right now.
Whenever you can, I want to hear more about it. I'm a big fan of your work, and like I was saying, it actually shocked me that the person that wrote Blitzed was willing to be on this show. So it's like tripped, of course, because it's psychedelic, but I'm just love the fact that you're here and that you're doing this interesting historical work. Have you seen anybody really, beyond the American conservative establishment, kind of anybody really interesting show interest in Tripped yet?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah. So, have there been some people who really surprised you by being interested in Tripped or enjoying Tripped? I know we covered a lot of that already, but anybody we might not have talked about?
I mean, I'm always fascinated when I give readings in like small East German town libraries, and there's like 45 people and like really like normal East German families with their son or something, or like not with their son, just like elderly people who are from socialist East Germany were not really didn't experience like the drug culture that the West at least partly experienced. you talk about LSD and it all makes sense to them, and then after the reading they want to know how could they get it. Also, they want to use this amazing brain food maybe, and so like the interest of normal people, like people who don't know the American horror anti-drug propaganda, like those are actually good people to talk to about LSD because they're very open towards it, and that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. So, um, where can people find your books? Kind of cliche question because I'm sure everywhere, but
Um, well, I think in bookshops actually you should be able to find it. I think bookshops still sell books, even though most bookshops specialize on stationery and little gifts. But at least in Germany, you can go to any bookshop and say you want this book, and if they don't have it there, you get it the next day, which is kind of a way to get around Amazon. But me as a writer, I actually also appreciate it if you buy it on Amazon. But I think I would prefer if you go to your bookshop. If you're too lazy, you can also buy it on Amazon. I would prefer you to buy a book over like downloading the audio because I make more money on the book. And also, I think a book is better because at least I think it's better. Like because you have it, you can look at it again. Like audiobook, like you can look at page 200, like what happened with my mother. Like it's too hard to use, I think. But I guess if I guess if you're like in a car a lot in the traffic, maybe then audiobooks are good. But I would encourage everyone to buy Tripped in a
hmm
bookshop.
yeah. Um, and I can speak to that too. I'm an audiobook person, and when I want to have citations, it's horrible. It's really difficult to track back to what I needed. And yeah, print and or ebook would be really, a lot more helpful there. So agreed. And we just want physical assets to be around. People
Yeah,
can't
books are
necessarily
nice.
get your. It's easier to share, all that kind of fun stuff.
Easier to share. You can kill mosquitoes. It has a lot of advantages.
Amazing. Well, Norman, I really appreciate you being here today. I hope we can do it. Assuming your next book is on drugs of some kind or another. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today.